Welcome. Are you guys excited? Yeah. Me too. As Lori just said, I'm Evvie Wright, senior editor of readitforward.com. Like the women you're about to hear from tonight, I too have a dream job. Through Read It Forward's online content and social media, I get to help direct people to their next great read. So after you're done reading these 4 authors' books, visit us at readitforward.com and we'll see if we can't hook you up with another great book. Tonight's event was created and produced by Random House Special Events, which seeks to create community and engage readers around the authors, ideas, and themes presented in our books. Stay tuned for news about coming events or visit randomhousebooks.com/events for more information. And now, without further ado, let's welcome our panelists. Taffy Brodesser-Akner is a staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. She has also written for GQ, ESPN the Magazine, and many other publications. Her book, Fleishman is in Trouble, is a finely observed, timely exploration of marriage, divorce, and the bewildering dynamics of ambition. Welcome, Taffy.
Thank you.
Linda Holmes is the beloved host of NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast.
Yeah.
Her first novel, Evvie Drake Starts Over, is a charming and heartfelt story about the unlikely relationship between a young woman who's lost her husband and a major league pitcher who's lost his game. Welcome, Linda. Emily Nussbaum is the New Yorker's fiercely original, Pulitzer-Prize winning culture critic. Her book, I Like to Watch, is a provocative collection of essays that argues for a new way of looking at TV. Welcome, Emily. Jia Tolentino is a breakout writer at The New Yorker. Her book, Trick Mirror, is a collection of original essays that examines the fractures at the center of contemporary culture. Welcome, Jia. So if you would, tell us all about your new book and why you were inspired to write it.
Okay. When I turned 40, well, I'll do it in order. My book is about a man who is recently divorced and who is caring for his children when his wife drops the kids off for his weekend and doesn't return. And I was inspired to write it when I turned 40 and a lot of my friends were coming to me and telling me that they were getting divorced. And they were also showing me these whole new lives they had, these dating lives that they were living through their phones that looked amazing and crazy for somebody like me who dated in the 90s and did not have that.
Nice.
My book is about a woman who, and this is not a spoiler because it happens in like the first 3 pages, is about to leave her jerk husband when she learns that he has died in an accident. And because nobody knew that he was a jerk except for her, she's sort of trapped in this situation where people expect her to be performing grief in a certain way. She then meets a baseball player who suffers from the yips. If you've ever seen the yips, it's the scariest thing in the world. It's people who just lose their ability in sports, particularly at, just wake up one day, can't do what they're good at anymore. So he is a former New York Yankee. I only would put bad things happening to Yankees in my book. I'm just kidding. I don't mind. And so they become close, and it's sort of about the relationship between them and also her relationship with her best friend and her relationship with her family. It takes place in her little town in Mid-Coast, Maine, which is a place that I really love. So that's my book. And I was inspired to write it because I had always wanted to write a novel, and I figured if I waited any longer, I was going to die before I got around to it.
I wrote my book because in 1997, I saw an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in its first season. It wasn't even an episode I think most people think of as very good. It was called The Pack. And we can discuss that later if you'd like. But anyway, it took me a few years after that to become a television critic, but it kind of lit me up with the desire to argue endlessly about TV and kind of evangelize for the values about television that I ended up trying to express through various essays. And it's a collection of my work combined with new essays that is set up to make an argument that I've been making for about 20 years during a period when television itself changed radically and changed me and challenged me. And it's about celebrating a wider variety of television than is often celebrated. And it is strange to put, to put stuff together to form an argument, but that's essentially it. And it's called I Like to Watch because I like to watch.
So my book it's basically 9 essays on, they're all new, and they're on things that I was obsessed enough with that I wanted to write too many words on, you know? And it's like, there are things like, I have this, you know, theory that is best explained at a length of 10,000 words about athleisure as a form of late capitalist fetish wear, and like, you know, the like American obsession with scammers and how scamming has become the sort of definitive millennial era ethos. And there were just these things that I knew that I wanted, that I couldn't answer when I wrote about them in little ways, and I wanted to just really go in as hard as I possibly could. And honestly, why I wrote it was like a couple of months after the election in 2016, I was like, I'm gonna be miserable for the next 4 years at minimum, and I might as well make myself miserable in a way that is also good in some way, like writing a book, and so I did.
So all of you create content, you know, long-form articles or podcasts. Why books? Why was a book the right vehicle to tell this story?
I never knew that everybody didn't want to write a novel until people started asking me during the discussions of this book, like, when did you know you wanted to write a novel? I'm like, when did you know you wanted to write a novel? Like, how about always? Because I just assumed that was something everyone wanted to do, because everyone grew up reading, you know, most people grew up reading books, and I assumed that most people grew up reading books, and therefore most people wanted to write novels, which is sort of like assuming everyone eats breakfast and therefore everyone wants to be a chef, but it's, so to me there was a specific desire to write a full-length novel and to develop these ideas at that length.
For me, a huge part of it was, like, I grew up blogging, kill me. Imagine. Since the age of 7. I had only ever written in the space of the internet where you get nearly instant feedback, and I was a little worried that I had written a novel. Everybody wants to write a novel, right? Like, I wrote a novel 7 years ago or something like that.
This is what I think.
No, but I literally
You never
was-
wanted to write a novel.
Yeah, I know. Emily not.
That's not true. I actually
You
made a
kinda
very
wanted to
brief.
know.
I made a very brief attempt to write.
See, everyone wants to write one. But so I had this brief period where I had written a book. I'd worked on a book for 4 years, and I never did anything with it. But I loved writing it because it was bad. But like, I really loved working in private, and I felt that it was a lot more psychologically healthy than this, like, the loop of instant feedback. And part of me wanted to see if I wrote any differently when I was just writing for me for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And it was incredibly pleasurable. And now this part.
For me, part of it was the feeling that a lot of my writing on television expressed themes that connected to one piece to another. Like I was publishing it over various years, and it was weird to look back on my work and recognize how much I was threading the same idea through and developing it and changing it as TV changed. And so you can't put stuff together without making it to a book. And then I took my book leave in the fall of 2017, and that was right as the Harvey Weinstein piece came out and the Me Too movement started. So I ended up writing a gargantuan essay in this book that's about that I kind of places it in the present in a different way. But there's a way in which putting pieces next to one another is very different than the experience of journalism and writing. I mean, it's not like blogging exactly, but the process of putting together columns, each one stands on their own in this odd way, and it's weird to see them resonate with each other. And it was strange because I read the audiobook and I was like, oh, I sort of see all sorts of connective tissue just from reading it out loud.
And can I just add one thing? Because I've read Emily for many, many years. And Emily and I disagree on a lot of television, but agree on sort of how to watch television. And even though I have read the pieces, a lot of the pieces that have previously appeared, I've read before. But there was a moment when I realized how often you're relating kind of the story of the show to the relationship between the show and the audience, or the showrunner and the audience. And I was like, this is a great way to kind of solidify your understanding of somebody's critical sort of view on a larger scale, is to see all these pieces together, because it really crystallizes that approach in a way that reading those things individually.
And for me, that was an oddly satisfying feeling, because when you write individual pieces, it just does sort of feel like, here,
Right.
see what you think. But that particular thing about the relationship of TV and its audience and how it's different than books and movies, and how TV needs to be detached from constant, endless, nervous comparisons to books and movies, works with part of the thing of putting together a book, which is that it relates to the audience in a completely different way.
Right. Well, so I want to go back to something that Jia just mentioned, which is, what is it like getting immediate feedback on a piece or a podcast, whether from just a great reader or a troll on Twitter, versus the long, drawn-out, often solitary practice of writing a book? Taffy, you must have experience with this.
The question is how is it different to get the feedback?
It's like, what is it like not to be constantly attacked?
And
even as you state the ideas.
I feel like it's wonderful. I feel like my whole journalism career has prepared me for attack, and that it's fine. Like I'm actually into the democracy of how people feel, and I think that the role that we have as journalists, at least, is to just put it out there, and people are allowed to engage with it however they want. People are allowed to dislike it. People are allowed to dislike it right in front of you on Twitter. People are allowed to dislike it to your face, and it's fine because you have the loudest say. Now, I mean, I haven't had so much backlash. It's only been out a few days, so I don't know. But I mean, mostly, I still feel like enough of a journalist. You know, I had that weird headline today. I had a review that said,
I'm gonna make a
it was
T-shirt
a big picture of me, and said, "This shrew can't be tamed."
You're not the shrew, though.
It felt like I was the shrew.
It did have a picture of her.
It had a picture of me.
But that's what I was
It felt
asking.
like I was the shrew.
Yeah, sure.
And I can see that, and I posted it to, I thought it was very, very funny to have a picture of me and call me a shrew, and I don't know. So I'm okay, it's fine.
Yeah.
I hate it. I hate that cycle of getting yelled at. I mean, I tolerate it because it's part of the job. And also because like the vast majority of people are super, super nice to me and supportive, and it's all part of the same machine, and you can't necessarily get the good parts and the bad parts.
Right.
But like when you spend a whole day, like there was a day recently where I was like, boy, I didn't realize it's been a long time since people called me a cunt all day. Like, and I realized that like it doesn't happen to me that often, but when it does, it's really unsettling. I do not like it. it doesn't feel healthy to me. I wish I believed it was part of some greater experiment with everyone.
I don't think
feeling
it is,
how
but
they
I can
feel,
always
but-
remember the bad things verbatim, whereas the good things get rounded into oh,
Right.
those people are just being nice, and I hate that.
Oh man, that's
Like
true
those
too.
100 people are just being nice, but that one person,
He really thought about that
he
before.
really,
He's like, you're a cunt.
he gets me. He sees my soul.
Yeah.
I think there's like something wrong with my brain though, because for me, because I think I worked at Jezebel for so much of my early career was at Jezebel, a place where, like getting called a cunt and getting sent pictures of aborted fetuses in your mail or in your email where it was standard.
Right.
The thing that I mean, certainly people are incredibly nice to me, but that's the thing that kind of scares me, that's how you turn, that's how you get lazy, like that's how you, like the worst writers are people who clearly have had smoke blown up their ass for decades and they've forgotten how to actually interrogate themselves. And even I can feel like even just the slightest complacency that writing's easy. I suspect it, and I sort of felt like for me, it's almost like the bad stuff is normal, and the good stuff, I'm like, and I hold it at a distance.
You know, I love the internet. I actually feel really, I feel like a lot of what I do would not have happened without all of the changes in the internet, and I feel like I've seen them happen because I'm old enough to remember when I was writing for the Times Arts and Leisure section about TV, and then every few months I would get like a handwritten letter by an assistant professor somewhere, like that would respond to an article. Like there was just no, there was no stuff just pouring in the transom. And then I sort of watched it change, and I remember this moment that I published a admittedly rather flamboyant pan on Slate, and it was splashed. This is really embarrassing. I actually don't like this review, so you know something? I'm not going to say it,
I'll ask you later.
Because it's like one of those young reviews where it was, I think I made some smart points, but it was a little voicey in a way I think people associate with Slate at that period. Anyway, they splashed it up on the homepage, and I got a weekend of what you were talking about, just like endless stuff. So I could certainly see the internet as a terrible place of abuse, but the fact is, my writing is completely shaped by my time on Television Without Pity, where I constantly talk to anonymous others about TV. That's my idea of criticism. That's in a lot of ways my idea of responses to TV. And the truth is, a lot of people who criticize me, including on Twitter, some of them I think are stupid and they don't have a point to make, and a lot of them I've absorbed what they said, and even if I disagreed with it, it actually strengthened my arguments, and I'm sort of grateful in the way that you're talking about for the global access to a global TV watching audience who many times have incredibly different opinions and ways of seeing things than the people in my immediate circle. So I actually feel like for me the value has really very much outweighed the unpleasant parts, which I would never deny exist.
But that's criticism, right? Like criticism, there's this how dare you? Like how dare you get to be somebody who has this like headline opinion about things. And I don't write any criticism. I'm not allowed to write any criticism. But the minute,
well, it's in things.
but the minute I put an I in any story, there's like this perceived audacity of like how dare you talk about yourself? How dare you talk about an opinion you had? So I don't know.
Jia, you write in Trick Mirror about really coming of age in the internet era and creating an
Why
online,
my brain is like this.
creating an online self for a long time. So in your essay writing, does it ever feel like you are laying yourself bare in this book, or is that par for the course for you, having grown up on the internet?
Well, the internet, I think, like having grown up on the internet, the way I interacted with it at a young age has to do with the same temperament that was already there and makes me, like, my temperament and my personality predates my interaction with the internet. And like, I've always been like an extremely, extremely open book. But it was funny, like I gave the book when I was done to a couple of my best friends, and they were like, wow, people are gonna know a lot about you when they finish this book. And I was like, fuck. I guess they are. Because it hadn't really, so there's a way in which my answer to that question is I was always like this. The internet just gave it a scaffolding through which I now interact, right? There's also part of it that in writing, as like, I think Taffy would say, like I put myself in things that I report even, like I put myself in things a lot, but it's not for the sake of laying, you know, of like, here's more about me,
Right.
because I think that you should know, right? Like it's never, like it's a lot more careful than that. It's like, here is how I can use my experience to make a point that I wouldn't be able to otherwise, right? And so it's like, it's not exposure for its own sake. It just happens to be the case that I will tell you my darkest secret after 5 minutes alone in a bar with you. But, you know, it's always, like, I never feel like I'm always careful to do it for a reason.
Right.
Emily, I like to watch revisits a lot of essays that were previously published. What was it like to go back to those through the lens of 2019 and where we are now?
Well, you know, it's one of those things where of the older pieces that are in a book combined with the new stuff, you know, you get to select the pieces that you think hold up. That's one of the nice things. And there are moments that I have little introductions on the older stuff where I get to kind of talk about where I was when I wrote that particular piece and how things have changed. So, you know, the moment that Girls was out is a different moment than now. The moment that it was partway through the first season of True Detective, also not quite the same.
That piece is so good, though.
You know, we were talking about internet responses. I still occasionally get people who are upset at me about the True Detective
good,
pan.
though. Oh,
It's
that
unbelievable.
True
Like a lot has changed, but the people, like, and at the time, people wrote to me with sincere, it wasn't just attacks or whatever, like sincerely outraged and hurt and saying, we deserve an apology for the review. Like, before you can go on and review other things. It was pretty intense. So sometimes reading things brought back nostalgia for debates that no longer exist. But also, it did make me aware of how radically TV has changed, and especially in literally the last 3 to 5 years. A lot of what the book is about developing a rhetoric to celebrate television as television. Episodic, collaborative, looping with the audience. I have all these things I want to say about it. But of course, the last 3 years, a lot of TV now comes through your phone streaming, and probably in 2 years through chips in your head. So it was interesting to trace and also kind of remember the different ways I even watched the shows. Like, I have a piece in there about Lost, and I had this sudden memory of, I was an editor at New York Magazine at the time, and Lost came out, and it was on a VCR thing, and I went in and like pushed it into, it was like, that itself felt very old school. So it's a series of memories.
So Linda and Taffy, in your fiction, you both upend tropes about marriage and divorce and widowhood. Why was it really important for you both to go outside of the well-grooved roles that readers have come to expect?
I didn't know I did that, but it's good to hear. I guess I don't know if you're talking about like a middle-aged divorced man novel, because I guess that's it, like the dumb answer is because that's how I would write one, right? And it's because, and it's not that I was trying to defy those. I loved those. I grew up on those. It's that once I was in one, I had no choice but to do it differently, because I'm not one of those guys who wrote those, who, you know, the thing I do in the novel, which is so informed by my journalism, is like consider everybody's side, right? Like I think about, whenever I'm listening to somebody talk about somebody else, I wonder what that person would be saying too. And then I try to find out. I go to that person in journalism. And I try to find out, and that's where this came from. But it wasn't on purpose. Sorry.
I think the same things that make your profile so good make the book so good, though. I mean,
Thank
for
you.
exactly the reason that you're talking about. It's a very empathetic book in that way.
Thank you.
I've read all these books. They are so good. I think like Taffy, I don't think I sat down like I'm going to, you know, upend certain expectations. I think it was more, you know, my hope is that this book is all of the best things about my writing, and maybe even about the way that I think. The book is, You know, I had somebody tell me one time that my writing about culture was humane, which at the time I thought was very insulting because it felt to me like you have a nice personality, kind of. But I think I understand it a little bit better now, and I hope the book is like that. And I think it's like, as with Taffy, it's like, this is the version of a romantic comedy / romantic story / friendship story that I would write, because it has things that I love in it, like Maine and baseball and people going rat-a-tat, talking back and forth about the TV that they're watching, because these are just things that I love and care about and felt like I'd be good at. So it's like what Taffy said, it's not calculated in that way. It's just, I think especially with the first novel, it's sort of just you into the book, like you hope it's all the best. Like, think of it as coming from my heart instead, if that's better.
It is. What's so funny about the humane thing is that when I first started and people would say that I was very empathetic, I was so upset about it because I wanted to be like I wanted to like get everyone.
Is this like is that like?
Well, I actually, that's funny. I wanted to say, I talked with my editor about the fact that I was like, I don't think I'm allowed to use the word humane anymore for art that I like, because I was overusing it. I was like, enlightened, humane. Yeah. Good trouble, very humane. Like, there were just a lot of shows that I really wanted to talk about the humanity of the shows, and I realized that describing that, I had to be more specific about what I was trying to say. But you felt like you were trying to get people,
it's such a
and people were saying you're
softball that you wrote this empathetic thing, and then I when I saw that people liked it was when I started to take pride in it.
That's what I feel like when you're trying to write criticism, when you're trying to write criticism and somebody says it's humane, it feels a little bit like I said, like they're saying, well, it's soft and mushy, but like you seem like a nice person, which to me is like.
No, I love that word.
The reason I was overusing it is I feel like it expresses like intelligent empathy and a kind of like kindness that is not syrupy and sappy, but actually engaged in a penetrating way with the nature of seeing other human beings.
I think I understand that now. I think at the time I sort of just like, I don't know, I twitched
You
that.
can have T-shirts that just say humane.
But think about how much like criticism and profile writing is like really actively not humane, and you can feel it when you're reading it, and you feel like colder afterwards, right?
But sometimes it could be like a euphemism for you weren't hard on the person.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Or the way that like luminous.
There's always a way to hate yourself when you're a writer. That's I think the headline.
I was just gonna say, you name the thing, and I probably thought about whether
I will
it's an
dismantle
insult.
your compliment.
Ninja
style.
That's so true.
So, Jia, you write about in Trick Mirror being inspired and informed by the spunky protagonists like Anne Shirley and Harriet the Spy. And of course, Emily, we know you were inspired by Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I want to hear from all of you, who were the characters or the cultural icons that you looked up to as girls and young women, and how did they shape you into who you became today?
Well, so for me, that essay in the book, part of that is saying I only ever identified with childhood heroines, in part because all of those girls were extremely brave and adventurous and tenacious, and they caused a lot of trouble even though they worked hard, like things that I still relate to. And then when they were teenagers, they would get really depressed, and like their narratives would be about them being desirable, and then they would become adult women, and then they would be bitter, and then they would die. And I was like, and reading these things as a kid, like being like 5 to 12 when you're reading, like when you go from Laura Ingalls to like whatever, or not 12, but when you first read Madame Bovary or whatever, you're like, is this what life is? Is this what the progression is? Am I going to, like become really like depressed and blank and then get married and be bitter and die, And so I still like cling really strongly to that period where I, like all of those girls, all of them really, like I was just at Books Are Magic today looking through the kids section, and it was like they were all, like they were really tenacious, adventurous troublemakers who, and all of them, of course, are like little writers, right? Like Jo March, Anne Shirley, Emelina Moon, like they're all little writers, and so I love them all.
I always have trouble with questions about heroes and aspirational women because I kind of always bridle a little bit at like, I love the show Buffy, but not because Buffy's my hero. Boy, Buffy makes a strange role model, actually, now that I think about it. But I mean, I can name writers and people that I admire. Are you asking for stuff that are like childhood models, or?
No, if you had any sort of fictional icons that you maybe looked up to as a girl that sort of, like Jia
It's so
was
funny,
saying.
because I was just about to name a bunch of writers I like that I thought
you
were
can
really
do that
good.
too.
Like Grace
I'd love to
Paley,
hear that
and
too.
people whose voices I admired because they were idiosyncratic and funny and smart at the same time. But I'm trying to think if I had a childhood heroine from a book that I read.
I think I became pretty anti-totemic in the same way. Like, I also bristle at the question, it's like, who's your feminist icon? And I'm like, please, Like, it's such a, like, I just never understood why relating to characters in that way would be useful, in part because it ended for me, it ended for me in childhood, and I never really idolized anyone again, like a fictional character again.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure on female characters to be
Right, and that
to be
too, yeah.
encouraging mirrors for women, and that's the tricky part. But I truly am I did actually like Laura Ingalls Wilder. I loved those books when I was growing up, and Caddie Woodlawn.
Yeah.
For some reason, it's all Frontiers girl. I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah. I mean, I was also a Little House on the Prairie person. But a lot of the people that I was reading about at that age, if I'm totally honest, were real people. Even like people that I read little biographies of. Like, I was very into Florence Nightingale at one point. I went as Florence Nightingale for Halloween one time, and my mom made me this blue dress and an apron and a red cross. And
Wonderful.
so I was very into real historical figures. I think I had I'm trying to remember who else. Like, probably some of like the women scientists and people like that. But I also was not a big admirer of fictional characters, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. I liked the Little House books. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. Florence Nightingale. I hit the buzzer and say Florence Nightingale.
I just wanted to be a man. I did not want to be, I did not have a female character. I just saw what men were able to do, and I thought, why would I, if you are admiring someone, all of the people that I was presented with were people who were given limitations. And I would read like a Philip Roth book, and I'd see Nathan Zuckerman being allowed to write about whatever he wanted to write about, and I wanted to be like that. But that's not a good 2019 answer, probably. I don't know. Oh, sorry.
Well, how about we switch to what are you all binging right now? What are you reading? What are you excited about? I need some recs.
I just finished Lisa Tadeo's book, 3 Women.
Oh, it's so
which
good.
Is amazing.
It's so good.
It's a nonfiction book. It reads like great fiction. And I'll let somebody else do a rec.
I just finished Fleabag.
Oh my God.
It was so good.
Taffy, so did I. Like,
And
on
I wish I
Friday,
could watch it again.
Me too.
I finished it in the bathroom,
Yeah.
not on the toilet. Like, I finished it huddled in the bathroom because my children would not give me a break. And we have a rule about interrupting emotional moments in season finales. And they were like, we didn't know
like
it was
kind of
the
a
season
Fleabag thing to
finale.
do.
Yeah, so Fleabag. It's so good. Everyone should
It
watch
is
it. It's on Prime, Amazon Prime.
It is so good.
It's so good.
It's wild.
It's so good.
I had been like putting it off because I knew, like, I was like, okay, just like 3 hours, you'll lose your mind. And I lost my mind more than I could. I turned my boyfriend just sobbing, like,
Right.
It's so good.
It was really good. Did you watch it with your boyfriend?
What?
Did you watch it with your
Yeah,
boyfriend?
yeah, yeah.
I needed to watch it alone.
I kind of wanted to, but he loves Fleabag, so.
Well, I'll tell you what I was reviewing this week is this new show on HBO called Los Spookies.
Oh my God, I can't wait to watch that.
Great.
What is it?
And it was such a, it
Los
was
Spookies.
Fred Armisen and these 2 writers whose names I'm blanking on, I think Juan Torres and Anna Fabrega.
Julio Torres? Am I-
Julio Torres and Anna Fabrega, I think. Anyway, it was such, when you're a television critic, you watch a million things, some of them are disappointing, and you also feel a little burdened by the amount of television, which is continually like expanding, like humidity. And so this was just this thing where I was going through screeners, and I clicked on this, and I was like, this is great. It's actually really funny and weird. It's half in Spanish, half in English, and with subtitles for each. And it's essentially about this group of horror fans that put on fake horror things for different customers. It's sort of hard to explain. But it just had this strange style, and the thing with TV is that it's always just exciting if you see something that has an original voice. I also love Fleabag.
Are you guys enjoying Big Little Lies, like the second Big Little Lies?
Oh, I hate this season.
Yeah.
No, I like it because it's worth it to me to watch Meryl Streep like chew her necklace.
Yeah, that was a great scene. I'm
going
to try that move. I'm
her
going to get
choices are so
I'm going to get a Star of David
Someone on
instead.
Twitter, Max, was saying that it's
Yeah.
like watching like a, like a world-class athlete play an exhibition game, right? She's just like, she's just
Do you know what I love
doing
about it?
kickflips, you know?
Do you know what I love about it? I live in a suburb, and I love that it takes seriously the world in which a woman sits in her car and enacts her life. Like my entire life takes place in a car, and I like that it doesn't pretend. Like I know enough about screenwriting that you're never supposed to have two people sitting in too many scenes where people have like dinner together. Every scene is two people talking in a car, someone thinking in a car, someone driving carpool in a car, and it is like, finally.
The thing is, I love the first season. I loved it.
I love the first
and
season.
there's no need for a second season. But I'm going to watch it. It has all those people in it.
I don't think I necessarily needed it, but after they made it, I was like, well, okay. It's like it's like when somebody, it's like being offered second helpings of something when you're sort of like, you don't really need to, but okay, I'll have a little bit, just a little tiny slice.
If it's there.
Yeah.
I was once like, while I was in my MFA, we were getting a pizza after like workshop, and one of my friends was like, I can't tell if this pizza is good. I got to eat the whole thing to see. By the way, I relate to this so much.
By the way, that is literally an exact description of my job.
Yeah.
I also recently binged Succession, which I really liked.
Succession is so good.
Emily, I also
are my
watched
role
all
models.
4 seasons of Billions after you wrote that column.
That's great.
Well, they're both like,
Billions
they're both
is
like,
great.
I
I
love
love
Succession.
when I talked about it on Twitter, I referred to it as like, it's an entry in the genre, get a load of these assholes television. And I normally am not that into that.
I think on Netflix, that's one of the
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah,
Get a load
or
of
it's like a
these assholes.
Blockbuster video.
Can you imagine that? That would be such a good
Get a hold of
script.
these
Get a load
assholes.
of these
Succession,
assholes.
It's always
Billions.
funny, like-
That's a lot of
Yeah,
shows.
but it totally started off like a guy. As soon as somebody on TV says merger, I'm like, or shares or like SVP. But this show, all of a sudden, like then it becomes weird because it becomes about people who are so strange and just like
Amazing.
such oddballs.
Like, what would you do if you had all this money? How would you behave?
I think it's
Crazy.
I'm quoting myself. No, I said in the thing that Succession is the show. It's like Billions is the show that Jared Kushner wishes was written about him, and Succession is the show that's actually about him. Yeah. It's sort of true because it's like weaklings.
Oh, man.
It's about weaklings.
They're
who are,
such bad people.
Yeah.
They're just such like weak weirdos, and you realize that because they were born into money, they don't have to deal with being weak weirdos.
It's such great performances. It's such. We could just talk endlessly.
Yeah.
But it has
We are
all
Succession
these
now.
it has all these amazing subplots, like minor characters, where you just understand this whole world of the playwright who's dating that guy. I don't know.
Oh my God,
yeah,
I love her.
Yeah.
And the financial dynamics to their relationships that render something half real and half fake.
And the daughter.
Yeah.
Well, so before we all start streaming here in our seats, I want to open it up to you for questions. Who's got a question? We've got a mic being passed around. See up there.
What elements of collaboration did you feel like you needed more of when you were writing? And what elements of collaboration were you surprised to actually get? Or was it just totally solitary?
There are two things I want to say in response to that. One of them is TV is such a deeply collaborative art form, and writing about television is very complicated because it's always hard to acknowledge that because I think the way that people write about art is often about celebrating just a singular voice. And my book contains 3 different profiles of showrunners. And I was thinking about the fact that when I profiled Kenya Barris, when I was on set with him, they were working on the episode that had, I think it was Good Times. It was Good Times, right? That was it. Within it. And the attention to the tiniest elements of getting it going was so emotionally moving to me because I was like, this is just invisible to anyone judging or loving or even disliking the show, is just the fact that you're, as you say, you can't produce it without that. Working on the book, the main part that was super collaborative was the fact that I wrote this immense, very personal essay, as I said, sort of about separating the artist from the art and Me Too stuff. I don't generally write stuff with memoir or personal essay aspects. I mean, it's a combination of that and kind of an analysis. I got great help from my editor, but I also had to show it to a ton of other people because I just couldn't figure out how to have the voice right for that. And I got invaluable feedback, some of which was contradictory. So I just think there's this quality to hearing multiple voices in response to your stuff that is just inseparable from what finally comes out, even though it's not clear because it's like, it's in my voice. So that part, the other thing is that, somebody putting together a book, it's a lot of things. It's like publicity, a cover, it's like, and the cover to this book is great. I want to thank the designer of the cover. I don't know whether that's what you're asking, but I'm like, that's part of the collaboration. I could never create a cover, and they created a cover, and that's part of what a book is. So I'm grateful to that, and people have those skills.
Yeah, I think there are elements of collaboration that are about the making of the actual book, right? I worked really closely with an editor and with my agent and with now everybody in publicity and marketing and everybody who's with the publisher. And a lot of those people helped develop the book. It changed quite a bit in editing. But there also are kind of a whole group of people who I think of as more kind of like personal collaborators in the sense that they're the people that I rely on for a little bit of a gut check in terms of, can you tell me that this is not a very foolish thing for me to be trying to do? And that's super important. Some of those people are like here, and it's a really like, you need that person who's gonna say like, yes, this is okay, keep going. And you need to know like, who's the person who will tell you to keep going no matter what? Yeah. And then you need to know who's the person who you'll get a sense from them whether they actually think you're on the right track or not. And you need both of those people. Yeah. So I have a lot of collaborators, but there is also a huge part of novel writing that is just you and little cursor going blinky, 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 and you're. So.
I will say that when other people ask me to read their work, I now say to them, what read do you want?
Yeah, what do you want?
And I say to them, do you want the supportive read where I just tell you what's working? Because I can do that. And like, do you want a critical read where we talk about structure? Like, because people need different things at different times, and sometimes they need them from different people, and it's really fraught.
Or do you just want me to tell you this is valid?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes
Do you just want me to tell you to keep going, which
Yeah.
sometimes is what you need.
Yeah.
Let's see, who else? Yeah, way over there.
Test.
First of all, congratulations on all of your books.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What was the piece that helped you establish or solidify your voice, and how does it compare to how you've developed as a writer now?
You mean the piece that we wrote?
Yeah.
I have an answer to this, but it's really stupid. The first thing I ever wrote about music is I used to edit this beloved bygone blog, The Hairpin, and thanks. I mean, God, R.I.P. It was the best, and I was like editing it while I was in grad school for fiction, and I was just like at this point I was like, it was still so fresh from the recession, and I was so close to being out of college that I was like, I will never be employed as a writer. Like, this is like a one-shot deal. So I was just like blogging about whatever. And the first thing I ever wrote about music, do you remember that Magic song, Rude? This song, like it provoked this response in me that was sort of like a cloud of bees was surrounding my head at all times, and I was just like, how do I write about this in a way that? And so I just wrote this like completely unhinged piece, and people were like, oh, good, Right. And it was like it was so heartening that there was a way on the internet to express your feelings very strongly. And even if they were extremely strange, if you meant it, sometimes it would work.
I wrote a profile of Gaby Hoffmann.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaby Hoffmann. I wrote a profile of Gaby Hoffmann where I felt like I started like the toddler walk into running of understanding what I should be doing in a profile, where I could sort of understand her through the prism of my own experience, which would allow me to amplify her experience more. And that was the first time I did that. And I think after that, things became easier for me.
Yeah, I had a pretty developed voice when I was at Television Without Pity, but it was really different from what NPR would want. So actually finding the right voice for an NPR blog at the beginning was actually quite difficult in some ways. And I felt a little bit adrift. And I eventually wrote two things that I think kind of helped me be like, okay, this is who I am. And one of them was a piece about Pixar not making movies about girls. And it was written in the form of like an open letter, and I would never do that now. I would write the piece somewhat differently. You asked how it's changed from now. When I look at that piece, I would write it somewhat differently. But it was written with a real earnestness of purpose about what I thought entertainment should be and could be. But it was also meant to be written with a certain kind of lack of rancor, I guess. And then one of the most successful in terms of traffic pieces that I have ever written at NPR was a list of 20 things about the Jennifer Lopez movie trailer, The Boy Next Door. And I thought, if I can do these two things both, I think we have something, Because by the way, that movie trailer is amazing.
It is.
The
movie was amazing.
Yeah, the movie's amazing.
The movie's amazing.
It's weird because I'm having trouble thinking of an early review, which is odd because I write criticism as well as other kinds of essays. But when I was at New York Magazine, where I wrote a piece that was a big piece about the idea of there being a generation gap in privacy that was called Say Everything. It was a big cover piece. And one of the things about it was that I had to find, the goal of the piece was actually to talk to younger people rather than to write one of these 3,000 pieces that people were writing, condemning young people for being out in public online. And so I did a lot of interviews for it. But when I was writing it, it had to have kind of a groovy theatrical swing to it. Otherwise, it just wasn't going to work because there was so much stick up its butt op-ed writing about the thing, and I kind of wanted the voice itself to make the case for what I was saying, which was kind of a contrarian argument about it's actually people who are out in public who understand what's going on in the world, and there's a value to it, and they have something to contribute. So I remember when I was writing it feeling like, I have to hone this so that it's smart and funny, and I can convince people to come along for the ride. And I do think that that's what happens in criticism, is that I often talk about criticism is not like here's a good thing, here's a bad thing. It is a form of theater. It's a form of conviction. It's a form of passion. It's trying to convince people and seduce them and shock them a little bit. And so there's qualities in that are all about word choices. And so I feel like when my work is at its best, it falls into that right space. Because if it falls into either side, it's a mess, because then it's just a bunch of gonzo voicey tap dancing, making jokes. And it falls on the other side, then it's this kind of stiff, preachy stuff. And so I do think I like writing in different ways. I've written a lot of reported pieces, but I think that there is something about criticism that is an oddly exposed thing, and it's taken a while for me to figure out, how do I want to sound?
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Yeah, right here.
But working in a newsroom that covers many other different things, politics and all of that, I know sometimes I feel like I really need to defend this interest. And the reason that I look up to your work is because I see how important that sort of writing is, that empathy to focus on arts and features. But I wonder if in today's very political world, if you ever feel that kind of insecurity or wanting to
I don't know. I guess I'm just curious about that.
I will say this. After Trump was elected, I was literally like, what am I doing? Like, I felt, I mean, I hardly think I was the only person who felt this stunned, beaten back, feeling. But part of it is I was like, I'm an arts critic. Like, what does that mean? Like, is that a trivial thing to do? And I wrote a piece that's in the book that's about humor in the election and jokes and the use of jokes by the right, by Nazis, like ironic humor, and how it helped elect Trump. And it was really hard to write. It was a couple of months after the election, and it basically fixed me writing it. Because I had a lot of trouble motivating myself, because it did sort of feel like it's just an emergency. It's still an emergency. I mean, there are many things that are, you have to prioritize what's important. But there was this level where writing that piece helped me, for right or wrong, feel and remember that aside from the fact that there were ways for me to actually respond to what was going on culturally, I was reminded, and also frankly from reading a lot of other writing about TV and literature and other things at the time, what else saves you than stuff that actually reminds you of the bigger world that is beyond the emergency, like the sort of way that people make leaps outside it. And there's stuff that people can do, I feel, especially in fiction and art that is fiction, that they can't do in nonfiction. And sometimes shows like that also provide a way for people to talk to one another about politics, which is, I think, something very striking about television, which is a mass form. But it's a long way of saying, like, I really did have a crisis about, like, arts criticism. Like, what is that? How is that helpful? But somehow I talked myself into believing it was.
I still think about this constantly, and I feel an active sense of guilt about a lot of what I write all the time. Like, I feel, especially like with climate, right? Like with the subjects that are hard to get people to pay sort of magnetized, sustained, like, attention to. I think about the fact that, I will spend 2 days writing about a meme, and ask people to read about it. And it's like, what use is that? And I think that that's something that I need to keep asking myself, because the only solution to me seems to be, hopefully you can write about this goddamn meme in such a way, I don't know, that is somehow useful in some, like, ontological, open your brain up in some possible way. But I feel active, kind of unresolvable guilt about this, because I'm never going to be a climate reporter. Like, I don't speak Spanish. I can't go down and report at the border right now. Like, and I think about this every day, and I don't know how to resolve it any other way than hope that, like, the criticism and the reporting that you do write leaves little levers open psychologically for something good to happen. And that's, like, about as hopeful as I can get about my own work.
I don't feel bad about it. I'll tell you, I had a similar crisis. When the election happened, I was on an Andy Cohen profile. And I was in the middle of, and I said, what am I doing here? And he said, you're writing a profile about me. And I went back to my editors and I said, this profile needs to be about how Andy Cohen got Trump elected. And I mean, if you read it, I pulled it off a little bit. And Andy Cohen's like, Andy Cohen had predicted that Trump would win. And it was because of who he was talking to. And it changed how I was doing this story. But I'll tell you something else. That on the day of the Kavanaugh hearings, everywhere I went, people were crying. Everywhere I went, women were traumatized and talking to each other. And I had a story come out that day about the same day, which I thought was a disaster, but it wasn't, about Bradley Cooper. And I looked on Chartbeat, which is our Bloomberg terminal of how the day is going for your story. And there were 5 Kavanaugh stories, but the second thing that people were reading most was the Bradley Cooper story. And I thought, there was something for people if they couldn't bear it anymore. And I think those things are real and they're true. And I think that loving the arts is not morally lesser than being engaged in politics. I just don't. I think we all need it.
By the way, I'd just like to throw in that when I was reporting my Kenya Barris piece, he also predicted that Trump will be elected. So Andy Cohen and Kenya Barris.
I mean, those guys.
Were the two people who
Is
knew.
anybody talking to them now?
I mean, I think
Should we call them?
I think I have some combination of like what Jia was talking about, feeling the unresolvable guilt, and also what Taffy's feeling, which is that the way that I get past that feeling, which I have a lot, is that every once in a while somebody will say, I just could not handle my day because of, something light like a work thing, or something really heavy like someone died, or, I just couldn't manage. And I listened to an episode of the podcast and it really made me feel better, made me feel like I had company. But there's definitely and the irony is I'm a little bit limited about what I can say about it because I work in a newsroom.
Right. We're not allowed to actually talk about
but
I can say anything I want.
and that's the thing is so it depends on the newsroom. Mine happens to be quite strict.
Mine too.
And I think that has been at times really painful. The metaphor that I used when I was talking to somebody about this once is like in the movie The Martian. He has to get back to Earth, but he also has to learn how to grow potatoes on the moon and shit. And I'm like the sweary person at this event, which is kind of funny. He has to learn how to grow potatoes on the moon. And the potato, on Mars, on the moon. On Mars, it's called the Moonchin, as you know. The potatoes do not actually solve the problem of getting back to Earth. The potatoes actually don't do anything. But if he did enough potatoes, he would die before he could ever solve the problem. So you hope that the writing that you do, the art that people love, is the kind of the space potatoes that kind of keep you chugging long enough that you can actually go address what you think the emergency, as Emily put it, is. So.
Well, I don't think we can end on a better note than space
Yeah,
potatoes.
Space potatoes.